Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Marita, for making this possible. And this is a really special event today. We've had um, very few discussions about poems by people who are still living. And uh, and so it's a special treat when the actual writers of the poems can can be here and we can hear them read and talk to them and ask questions uh, today the poet is Krysten Hill, and I have to confess that I know Krysten because it's really about 10 years ago.
Yeah, like 10 years. It's crazy.
Isn't that amazing that Krysten was in the MFA program at UMass Boston? I was lucky enough to be one of her teachers. And Joyce Passaroff, who is tuning in from Florida this morning, is another one of Krysten's teachers from the MFA program. And I was just rereading my comment on your on the last class we were in together, and how grateful I was that you were in that class. And not only did I love your poems, but I was how impressed I was. I said I was always it always made me very happy when we agreed about other students' poems, because I felt, I must be on solid ground if Krysten agrees with me. Krysten has a chapbook that came out do you have it there? Oh yeah.
Well, what was the name again? You didn't hold it up long enough.
I'm sorry. It's How Her Spirit Got Out. This is my galley copy. It's usually a blue cover.
Right. It's a prettier cover than
yeah, exactly. This is just an old copy that I had.
And then a couple of years ago, I think, well, what is it? It was July 2020. There was an amazing poem on Poem a Day on the Academy of American Poets website. And it was Krysten's poem. And I was completely blown away. And I have been blown away by it every time I've read it. And I've been reading it a lot. Oh, good. The link to the to Krysten's chapbook is in the chat. And so I think we should start by, I will ask Krysten to read her poem. And can't wait to hear it.
Krysten, before you get started, can I ask a favor? Can I mute everyone except Krysten so that we can, okay, wonderful. Okay, and Krysten, let me unmute you. And I wonder, there you go. Krysten, go for it.
Yeah. Lloyd, as always, thank you for that really heartfelt introduction. You always come to things with so much heart, and I just really appreciate that. And Joyce, I'm so happy you're here too. And it means the world to me that y'all have stayed in touch throughout these years and kind of been excited about the things that have been happening after the program. I don't think that happens a lot in other programs. And so I'm really thrilled that exists, that community still exists. It helps me to be a better poet, to know that people still have my back. So with this in mind, I'm gonna read this poem. I don't know, every time I read this poem, I come into it with a different kind of energy because something different is happening in America. So we'll see how this goes. And so this poem is called Nothing. I ask a student how I can help her. Nothing is on her paper. It's been that way for 35 minutes. She has a headache. She asked to leave early. Maybe I asked the wrong question. I've always been dumb with questions. When I hurt, I too have a hard time accepting advice or gentleness. I owe for an education that hurt and collectors call my mama's house. I do nothing about my unpaid bills as if that will help. I do nothing about the mold on my ceiling and it spreads. I do nothing about the cat's litter box and she pisses on my new bath mat. Nothing isn't an absence. Silence isn't nothing. I told a woman I loved her and she never talked to me again. I told my mama a man hurt me and her hard silence told me to keep my story to myself. Nothing is full of something, a mass that grows where you cut at it. I've lost 3 aunts when white doctors told them the thing they felt was nothing. My aunt said nothing when it clawed at her breathing. I sat in a room while it killed her. I'm afraid when nothing keeps me in bed for days. I imagine what my beautiful aunts are becoming underground and I cry for them in my sleep where no one can see. Nothing is in my bedroom, but I smell my aunt's perfume and wake to my name called from nowhere. I never looked into a sky and said it was empty. Maybe that's why I imagine a God up there to feel what seems unimaginable. Some days I want to live inside the words more than my own Black body. When the white man shoves me so that he can get on the bus first, when he says, I am nothing, but fits it inside a word and no one stops him, I wear a bruise in the morning where he touched me before I was born. My mama's shame spreads inside me. I've heard her say there was nothing in a grocery store she could afford. I've heard her tell the landlord she had nothing to her name. There was nothing I could do for the young Black woman that disappeared on her way to campus. They found her purse and her phone, but nothing led them to her. Nobody was there to hold Renisha Mcbride's hand when she was scared of dying. I worry poems are nothing against it. My mama said if I became a poet or a teacher, I'd make nothing, but I've thrown words like rocks and hit something in a room when I aimed for a window. One student says when he writes, it feels like nothing can stop him, and his laughter unlocks a door. He invites me into his living. Thank y'all so much.
Oh, thank you for reading that. That was extraordinary. Maybe, is it okay if we start with my asking you how that poem came into being?
Yeah, I was trying to remember that. And I, by chance, sometimes I keep drafts of the things that I've made in my journal and in little pockets in here.
Oh, wow.
And I found it. I found the first,
Oh my gosh.
first half of this poem. I mean, there's some stuff in here too, but it just started on a scrap of paper that I had on the train. You know, when you get a line and it's messing with you, and I don't remember what the line started with. I asked a student how I can help her. That was the first line that came to me because I had a particularly difficult day of teaching. And a student she was in distress and I didn't know how to help her. And I just walked away from school just feeling a little bit like defeated and kind of going over what was wrong and how could I have done something differently. And so I went to a bar, right? And I just sat with a glass of wine and like a crazy person, I bet the bartender thought I was crazy. I just started writing until I couldn't do it anymore. And sometimes poems happen like that, and it always surprises you after like months and months of nothing, right? This suddenly something happens and you're just like, okay, let's just get this all. So it all came out at once. And I was grateful for that. That doesn't happen very often. I'm not like but yeah.
When did the title come to you? I mean, at what point?
I don't know. I think maybe I probably struggle with the title because, as you know, Lloyd, I've always struggled with titles. And Joyce knows this as well. I've always had a hard time titling anything, but I think that just the echo of that word and just the fullness of that word and the way I like the way it sounds, I just put it as the title. And that title might change. I don't know one day, but for now, that's what it is.
No. Don't change the title. Great title. Absolutely brilliant title. And I think I think it's one of those titles that absolutely captures the reader's attention. And you want to see, well, nothing, but here is this thing that comes after it in all these lines. Why is it nothing? And I think it's the first really great thing about the poem. I mean, including everything that comes after it. But it is absolutely, I think it's just marvelous. I think we are just being joined from someone in Brazil. Hello, Selena. Well, let me just open up the group to comments or questions. And in a little while, I really, I want us to talk about what makes this such a good poem. But just some comments and from the group first.
It ought to be the entry for nothing in the OED.
Well, there's nothing out of something.
I noticed that the words no and thing don't show up maybe at all. So it really leans into the way that the word nothing kind of closes over and hides both of those by sort of losing them from its phonetics. So it becomes much more its own sort of indivisible, kind of opaque object, and that gives it more power to haunt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Denise.
I'm sorry, Lloyd. What I was thinking is
Yeah.
the the sort of deferred sense of nothing, like when Krysten asked her student the question, what's wrong or whatever. And when something terrible is wrong, we often say nothing. And I feel that sort of counterweight all throughout Krysten's poem, that the nothing is a matter of the difference between the way we speak and what really is. Which I think poetry weighs heavily in the implied rather than what is said, and in that it makes it just a great subject for a poem, and that sense comes through the nothing repeated throughout the poem. That's what I gathered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also love the way it opens up with her asking a student and in how she can help, and it ends with the student helping her, different student, and the complexity of the word nothing. It seems it's nothing. We throw it out so easily, but yet the different layers of what nothing can mean are explored so beautifully in this. It's really, really fabulous.
I think of the Wallace Stevens line about the nothing that is not there and the nothing that is, and how much this poem is a fulfillment and an expansion and even a deepening of that idea. Yeah, am I oh yes, Jennifer, what tell us about that. Talk about that line that you just quoted.
Oh, I was thinking about how Krysten's poem sort of upends Auden's phrase, poetry makes nothing happen, or brings out what's buried in that anyway, how important it is to make nothing happen as an active thing. I think that's really what this poem is doing, is making all different kinds of nothing happen, and helping us feel its impact. I don't know. For me, I'm still thinking. I love the point that it's a student's problem that launches the poem, and a student's offering that opens things out at the end. That just seems wonderful, and to match somehow in between that it's a poem about the impact of nothing through generations, the mother, the aunts. I'm still thinking about that as somebody who comes from a family who really often didn't speak about things. Or especially in the generation before, my grandparents' generation before, kinds of shame that just you knew that was speaking, but you didn't go there, you didn't touch that. So I'm feeling all those different ways that nothing gets passed on and answered or addressed.
Yeah. Bill, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. We're speaking about the ending as opening out. I think that's what Jennifer said, and she's right, of course. But all through the poem, or at least beyond a certain point, we're not quite sure which nothings designate a nothing that is something and which not. And at the end, the seemingly confident statement of the student, he feels like nothing can stop him, could invoke the nothing that is something, in which case it becomes more ambiguous. He feels like nothing, there is nothing which can stop him, but also insofar as the nothing is a substantive something, there is something which can stop him. So it's still rather double-edged at the end. Obviously there is a movement from the stasis which afflicts the first student in the poem and the seeming confidence of the second student at the end, but the second student's confidence is faintly undermined by the indeterminacy which we've been encouraged to attach to nothing in the poem.
I find that ending I find it really heartbreaking. It's so moving, and you just I mean, in a way, there's a kind of innocence about that student who maybe has or maybe hasn't experienced yet what the poet has experienced, but maybe has, and
Yes.
and finds and like Krysten herself has found a way to counter that experience by writing poetry. And what I want to say, what's so rich, one of the things that's so rich about this poem is that, if you want to say, well, what genre of poetry is this? Is this a poem about, is it a political poem? Is it a social poem? It's really kind of ars poetica also. It's really about poetry. And
Yes.
and it's very personal and very public. It's just operating on so many different levels that you don't have to choose.
A third.
I'm very distracted by the chats. You have Joyce.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you say is how the poem starts with not writing and how it ends with writing, how it feels like nothing can stop him. And that final line, he invites me into his living, is exactly what the poem has done. It's invited us into the author's living. And so I think in a way that is double-edged, even though his laughter unlocks a door, that living that we're invited into has both its moments of laughter and its moments of intense pain. And so there's the movement from not writing to writing is also has its ambivalence in this poem, which just adds to its enormous resonance.
Yeah.
Could you say something, please, Krysten, about how you arrived at that last word? Because unlocks a door, the obvious next sentence would, he invites me into his life, noun. But the fact that you made it a present participle gives that dynamic quality that people have been responding to. And I wonder, did you have a thought process about making that decision, that choice?
Absolutely. And I think my partner is also a poet, and we went back and forth about that line. It was interesting because I can't remember what it was, and if he's here, I don't know if he's here. I don't know. It was just that misplaced kind of grammatical choice that I felt like was more fun in the language. But that's, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I mean, you just put your finger on something else. You keep us a little off balance. We don't just call it the end of the poem. But you do disequilibrate us readers with that. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well,
hi, this is.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Louise. Hi, this is Sharon. Thank you, Krysten, for being here, and for Lloyd for bringing us this poem of yours. To me, the profoundness of this poem is that towards the end, in like line 33, you use the word dying for the first time, and you end with the word living. And the nothings are everything in between the birth, before being born in line 26, and dying. So the nothing is the everything in between. And the descriptions of the inevitable deaths that are happening and the hard experiences that echo in the body, I think that is the nothing, which is the everything. And I just so appreciate that. Thank you.
For me, I had a similar experience. I feel like, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like there's such a powerful reticence. There is almost nothing overtly said about anger and fury and desperation that obviously must have come up in all these incidences mentioned. But because nobody's saying, look at me, I'm hurting, you know, I'm just saying, there's nothing here, there's nothing, there's nothing. And somehow that makes you feel it all the more. That it's just laid out like, this is my life. And in some instances, people are telling me it's nothing. This is really something.
Yeah. Yeah. And we get that the man who shoves her so she can get on the bus, so he can get on the bus ahead of her. And he says, I am nothing, but fits it inside a word, but she doesn't say what the word is.
Yeah, we can imagine.
We can imagine. Yeah. And also, I think that same quality, the same thing about the ending, that in a way, he invites me into his life, would be very real, but it's very predictable. I mean, as writing, it's predictable, and that to say he invites us into his living, it's almost as if he invites us into his living room.
Yes, yes.
But it's living, but the room is the living. And how much more complicated and interesting and surprising that is, and how much more powerful that is I mean, in terms of literary qualities, as an ending to a poem. It really hits you. And I think it's almost unpredictable that could be the case, and yet there it is. And how amazing that works.
Life would have been very static.
Yes, right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that this poem isn't static.
That's right.
This poem really keeps moving. Linda?
I'm sorry, it's the ongoing stuff of her life.
Yeah.
Like this whole poem is her living, not necessarily I'm giving you my whole life, but inviting us into her living in a way so that we can experience some of these things that are not nothing.
Not nothing. Yeah. Yeah.
About what's
Catherine.
unspoken, yes. Rage is as Linda said, as somebody, rage it's not named, but I think in line 3, the speaker shows us the bruise or one of the bruises. There's, we're given 2.5 lines to guess what's wrong in the student's life, which she's covering over. I have a headache. And the speaker says, maybe I asked the wrong question. That there's that moment, 2 lines of self-deprecation. What's wrong with me? so that she bears that bruise.
Yeah.
Even she's not, that as has been pointed out, she doesn't necessarily name, but she shows that to us so immediately. So,
Which is so different from so many other moments in the poem where people don't look at themselves and don't see the bruise or question themselves.
Yeah.
Well, at the end, the living that the student is inviting us or her into is the experience of his living. And here we've been invited into the experience of Krysten's living so poignantly, so powerfully.
Yeah.
This is an
Wendy,
amazing,
hi.
hi. This is an amazing poem, Krysten. I just so powerful, and the frame is just fantastic too. I mean, this very kind of immediate problem of a student who's stymied by writing and can't write anything, and then the way the poem just keeps deepening with this wonderful turn. Nothing is in an absence, and nothing is full of something, and then it just, the stakes keep getting higher and higher until I almost can't breathe. I mean, I feel like now I'm way in the deep end, with racism, violence, that medical profession and its racism, and this tension. I mean, I don't know if we're going to get out. We're going to be able to breathe, and even this questioning of whether the poems are nothing against it, and just being in that state of tension where, is there a rescue here? And then, yes, there is. And then the power of those words. And then we're kind of brought up back to the surface, but, with a heavy kind of feeling and also an uplift. So it's just that movement that it goes so deep. And then we begin to surface again at the end. So that was just one thing that struck me.
Yeah. Thank you. Wendell?
Well, we talk about the self-deprecation that it starts with, but by the end, I really love this. I've thrown words like rocks. That, in fact, that's what the poet has done for us. This is nothing, but it's loaded with really, and even if you aim for the window, but if you hit something, yeah, we got to break up some things. I just love it. I love that particular line.
I'm so glad you focused on that passage. I think that's one of the most interesting moments in the poem, and it's a moment of it seems to me of real ambiguity also, because it's the poem is both doing something, but it's also doing something that the poet wasn't expecting it to do, or didn't even want it to do. That it was aiming at the window, it was aiming at letting air in, letting light in, and then, but instead, it hits something in the room, and maybe that's even more important than it hitting the window. That it's more it's more of an expression of power, not just to let in light and air, but to actually hit a target, to hit something real and really powerful. I think that's an extraordinary moment. Catherine, did you know?
Lloyd, I have a question.
Oh yes, Stephen. Hi.
Hi. When I read this, I did not think Krysten was intending this, although I kind of hope she has. So it's a question for Krysten. But I thought that line was also an allusion to the Americana of the Jimmy Stewart movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Because if you remember in that movie, they throw rocks to break a window, and if you break the window, you get a wish. Do you remember that when they go to the old house? And if so, I thought, what a great thing to put this, fake, sweet American version of life as a backdrop for a very real version of contemporary American life that doesn't necessarily grant our wishes. So I didn't know, if Kristen, if you had that in mind, or was it just a happy accident?
That was a happy accident, but I didn't remember that until just now. Thank you for bringing that to my memory. That moment in that movie, we watched every Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's important. Yeah, I put in the chat. Gwendolyn Brooks has this poem, "Boy Breaking Glass," that only came to me after I had written that line. Sometimes all y'all know, you write lines and you don't understand where they're coming from. You kind of grab them out of your psyche and you don't understand what that language is doing, but you put it there anyway. And I think that was part of that. I didn't really understand why that was the answer to that particular line that was constructed there.
In line with what everybody's saying about that line, I think some of the power of it is simply in that word something. I don't think that word appears any other place in the poem. And all of a sudden we have the so-called opposite of nothing. And it's in the language there. Just that single word, I think, is what makes the wham effect.
Yeah.
While we're talking about this part, I am in love with this part. It answers something that's impossible to answer with words, and it does it with words. How and why does poetry matter? And this poem does that. It does it right there.
I have a question to ask. Kristen. When you came to that word something, did you have a question of whether to use someone instead of something? Instead of like acknowledging that there's a reader out there, that you're really trying to hit us with something. And any comment on that?
There are so many times I read poems to certain audiences and I'm aware that maybe that poem didn't hit anyone. But maybe it hit something. Does that make sense? This idea of like, even in a classroom, you're aware that like maybe this knowledge doesn't hit someone right away, like the body, right? But it hits something maybe that they're thinking of, something specific. Yeah, and I also thought about how when we might throw a rock and it doesn't hit a window, it might bounce back at us when it hits a wall, right? So the something that you throw out could very much come back at you. That was kind of part of the way I visualized that image a little bit.
I was just thinking about, and maybe you can add to my list. I know only 3 poems about teaching, and they're all wonderful. One is by Gail Mazer. One is by Jane Kenyon, and one is by Alice Madison, who I regret that people don't really know her as a poet. But it's such a rich subject, and I would certainly put Kristen's poem into that category also, and what a rare topic that is, even though a lot of poets are teachers and have had that experience, but to actually get it into a poem, it seems quite extraordinary to me. Do any of you know any other poems about that?
Billy Collins' poem about tying up the poet and trying to force a confession out of it.
I'm trying to remember that.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, good.
I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah, no, we'll add that add that to the list.
But something I struggle with as a poet who's also a teacher is that line between exploitation, especially when I'm working with a diverse population of students, and celebration of their experiences. I've gone as far as to like send poems to students who might recognize an allusion and say, is this okay? I'm very aware of that as a Black poet who teaches Black students. I do not also, and maybe other poets who are teachers, maybe y'all can fill this in a little bit, but that kind of concern with that. And while there are lines here that celebrate the experience of students, what we remind students in the class is that your story is yours, and I'm not here to talk or exploit your trauma. And that's always something that's in the back of my mind when I do put students in poetry, even though I don't name them specifically.
Right. But that I think, this is partly to repeat what other people have said. The way you bracket this poem in the classroom with the student who can't write, and you can't help her, and then the student who is actually writing and is writing his life. It's just marvelously done, and it's done with great tact. And I think that's so extraordinary. Michael has mentioned Yeats is among school children, and yeah, let's add that to the list.
This poem and your teaching reminded me, I had the privilege of a poetry workshop at Hampshire College from Andrew Salke, and he taught a little bit like you're expressing here. He had this way of throwing rocks. I remember when I met him before being accepted into the workshop, and he told me that I had perfectly captured the cadence of Hallmark cards. And yet...
Oh, congratulations.
Why, thank you. Some of his more gentle advice after I'd been in the poetry workshop has really stuck with me in my life as encouragement. And I remember another professor saying, there are some professors who delight in being cruel, but he was not one of those. When he did a zinger like that, it had a purpose for you as a writer, as a poet. And I see some of that same kind of energy in Imagining You Teach from this poem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question to Krysten about line endings? Because the line endings seem to me often to work very effectively, and yet in your rendering of the poem, you didn't really respect them much. You tended to read with the syntax rather than with the lines. And yet clearly there's been a lot of attention given to where to break the lines. Is that a preoccupation for you as you write?
Absolutely. I think that is a very good point. Obviously, formally, we're thinking about where a line breaks, but Patricia Smith often talks about this idea of every time you approach a line, when you're reading it out loud, there's might be a difference in the way you read it than the way it's presented on the page. And every time you read it, the place where you emphasize or the place where you kind of you put that emphasis might be a little bit different. I always think about how, and that's a very good point, I don't often read for the form on the page. Often I'm kind of reading for just the value of the natural line of it. You know what I mean? It's just like, how would that sound out loud so that it makes sense to people? I'm always thinking about that when I'm kind of trying just to read effectively.
I appreciate that, and I have certainly heard poets read one line at a time, and it's as if they want to make me that the object is to make me want to see the poem on the page. And that's not what I want to do when I'm listening to, excuse me. It's not what I want to do when I'm listening to someone read. I really, sorry. I really want to get what's going on in the poem. And that when I look at the poem, certainly line breaks are extremely important. And they will, if the line breaks are really good, they will add another dimension to the poem. But it's not a dimension that I personally demand from hearing a poem read out loud. I have enough problem just concentrating on what the words mean when I'm just listening to them. So, but I think that's a real issue, and I agree with Bill that your line breaks are. I mean, just look at the last words of the first few lines of the poem: paper, headache, question, hurt, gentleness, house, help. I mean, those line endings are really strong and really powerful and moving. But we don't exactly need to hear them, especially if we can, if we can read the poem on the page.
I was thinking about moments like "Some days I want to live," line break inside the words. I was Krysten read that as "I want to live inside the words." When you experience it on the page, obviously, "Some days I want to live" seems to bear the implication that there are some days when I don't want to live, when I want to die, because the sense seems complete at that point. Of course, then it unfolds into an opposition between where one wants to live, whether inside the words or the body.
Yeah, it's a wonderful moment in the poem.
Yeah,
it's an important moment in the poem. Lots of messages in the chat, and
Brian, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. I didn't want to interrupt Lloyd if he had something queued up.
Oh, no, Brian, please.
I had this thought earlier when people were talking about rocks and the nothing that's something. And it felt to me, and Lloyd talked really well about it, and you did, Krysten, about this difference between how the poem is constructed on paper and how it's spoken. And I was really relieved to hear that you aren't constraining yourself to how it was first put on paper, because it felt, when I was reading it, like you constructed a wall out of nothing and put it out there, and that people, intended or not, were going to run into it and really experience how nothing becomes a block and a physical object. And then when you read it, it felt more like spilling, like a whole bunch of things just spilling out. So I wanted to ask, as someone who's reading the poetry out loud, are you thinking about that difference when you're writing it down?
That's a really great question. And I think that block of text is really, that was an intentional, this poem lived in a lot of different iterations. I mean, I thought about it as that vertical plunge. And I also thought about what the presence of the visualness of that block, to encounter that block of text. Because it does kind of straddle that line between poetry and prose, right? In a way, because it's so blocky and so clunky. And that was one of the concerns that I had in the early drafts of this. This poem lives in different kind of line breaks. It lives in a different kind of presence on the page. But at the end of the day, that was a conscious decision that the block of the text should exist just for the visual sense of it. But also when you read it, it might feel and sound a little bit different than what that block might project. Yeah. Thank you for your attention to that.
Oh, thank you for answering.
I'm gonna ask Krysten a sort of a kind of funky question, and do you know how good this poem is?
I mean, with all poetry, sometimes, I don't often step away from it. I wish Tara was here, because sometimes Tara sends me, like, when poems get published, she's like, I just want to say that poem was great. And I said, that was the poem that I was most worried about sending out. And Tara Skirtu might say that those are often the poems that get published, the poems that we're most worried about when we are sending them out to publications. I don't know why. I know why I worried about this poem. It's because it's so naked in the way that you are projecting your experiencing and hoping that it doesn't get torn to shreds, right? It doesn't, especially if you're talking about generational trauma, or especially when you're naming a thing that might be difficult for people to digest because maybe they don't come from that experience. I think that's a timeless feeling for poets, that sense of, like, when you send something out in the world, how will it be taken, and will it be cared for, or will it be destroyed? And of course, as a Black poet, I'm always thinking about that. Whose audience will this reach, and whose audience maybe will not see the value of that? And that's their choice. And at the end of the day, I have no control of that. And I think this poem was just difficult for me to send out because I was just worried about how vulnerable it was.
Yeah, but that's it is very vulnerable. But I want to go back to the word that I used before, that there's an innate sense of tact in the poem, that this is a real balancing act that you've achieved. And I think it's interesting. I don't know. I would imagine that a lot of people here today are familiar with Poem a Day. If you're not familiar with Poem a Day, you should just sign up, because you get a free poem in your inbox every day from the Academy of American Poets. But that it's also one of the most read. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people will see this poem, have seen this poem, and will have seen the poems in Poem a Day. So in a way, it's also, it's reaching a much bigger audience and a much broader audience than, publishing it in a small press literary journal. And I think people respond to that vulnerability, and that's one of the it's a painful poem in many ways, but it's one of the pleasures of the poem is, we're all vulnerable. and to identify with your vulnerability, which may or may not be about different issues than each of our own areas of vulnerability, that we have that vulnerability in common, and it's so moving, and I think it's just great that so many people have read it. Have you? What have been the responses to it after it came out?
So right after it was up on the website, I remember getting some strange emails from just complete strangers. And I mean, they were often very positive, but also you get the trolls, right? You get
Oh
people
God, yeah.
who maybe are coming at this from a different intention. And so I don't mean like trolls like this was ungrammatical, but like trolls who were just like, oh yeah, you whiny crybaby, like get over it. You know, I got that mail. That was still very much a part of the way that this poem was accepted. I also got like messages from like psychologists. That I got one particular message from a psychologist that was just breaking down the psychology of students, and the way that the gender differences between why the girl at the beginning and the boy at the end, and why their responses in the classroom might have been a little bit different. And so that kind of insight was also very, very appreciated, and kind of it really highlighted something that I didn't think about. So
yeah, you have to you sift the general from the particular, and I did that in this poem by I do nothing about my unpaid bills, as if that will help. I watch the mold spread on the ceiling or whatever. I do nothing about the mold on the ceiling, and it spreads. And so, you know, I can't say that I know what it means to suffer in a Black body, but I do know what it means to have unpaid bills. And so, you know, you have to, those lines are very powerful. And I think to allow a poet their particular identity and expression, if they can relate, if they can come across to you with just one or two lines, I think they've done their business. And that's communication, meeting, but also differing. So the poem does a great job at that.
Oh, yeah, Michael, thank you. I want to look at these lines near the beginning of the poem. Maybe I asked the wrong question. I've always been dumb with questions. And of course, I think it's one of the things one fears most about teaching. Are you asking the right questions? And it's very tough on oneself. The poet is being very tough on herself. I've always been dumb with questions. When I hurt, I too have a hard time accepting advice or gentleness. And how honest that is. I owe for an education that hurt. And I think that's one of the key, for me, that's one of the key lines in the poem. That in a way, I think, yeah, education hurts. And yet, you know, we pay for it. I don't know, Catherine, yeah.
Well, that was those lines you just picked up, Lord. That was what I meant about her showing the bruise in her, blaming herself. I've always, been dumb with.
Right.
And also a self-knowledge, though, that what she was offering the student was advice or gentleness. That was a lovely, perception of herself. I thought, I just wanted to go down about the question of particular and general. I'm a psychologist. I've heard this so many times. I told my mama a man hurt me, and her hard silence told me to keep my story to myself. I've heard that from so many women patients, but your phrase hard silence so distilled that whole complex experience, emotionally complex experience, hurtful experience, hard silence.
Yeah, I think that choice of words is extremely powerful. And Krysten, I think you will laugh at this. That as I said earlier, I was reading the comment that I wrote on your portfolio, and one of the things that I complained about, or I was suggesting that you cut the word silence, because silence by itself is sort of, is almost a kind of poetic cliche. And hard silence, you make it live, you make it real, you make it palpable. And I've never heard anyone use that phrase before. And in this context, it's devastating. So I congratulate you on the way you use the word silence in this poem. Any other particular moments is there, Krysten, is there anything else about the poem that you want to mention in your comment about the poem that's published with the poem? You talk about Audre Lorde, and I'm wondering if you have anything more to say about Audre Lorde and how she is a spirit behind this poem.
Yeah, the transformation of silence into action, that essay from Sister Outsider was definitely on my mind when I was writing this. And that idea of she's really struggling with her mortality. I think she was talking about her cancer diagnosis and then coming away with it with this renewed feeling of it's better to speak, before your time runs out, right? And risk being misunderstood or bruised, right? That's kind of like in the first, I think, paragraph of that essay. She's struggling with the mortality, and even as a young Black woman, I struggle with the issue of my mortality when Black women can be shot in their beds while they're sleeping. I think about what it is to just do the thing and to risk what can be said. Risk saying the thing that is difficult. So I definitely think Audre Lorde is always in the back of my mind when I'm trying to work out what is the function of silence when we are really struggling with something that maybe needs to be spoken. But also I'm very aware that sometimes our silences give us an opportunity to work things out and to be alone with those thoughts and to kind of figure out when do I have what it takes or what I need to actually speak the truth into existence.
Can you talk a little bit about your reference to Renisha Mcbride And I find that that's a, you know, there are a lot of people that you could have referred to. I mean, that moment of political and social awareness enlarges the poem, and that's a particularly I think that particular reference is a very interesting one. Um, um, that choice. Um, um, can you talk about that a little bit?
Renisha Mcbride, to name her was important to me because she, part of the reason that she was killed, it's contentious, right? Because she made a mistake by driving intoxicated, but that didn't warrant her murder.
Murder. Right.
And I think when I think about Renisha Mcbride and how much I wanted to give her service here, it's because she made Black women aren't allowed to make mistakes sometimes. And the amount of work she had to do to get help after she had crashed her car really resonates with me, because how many times have I done something incredibly stupid that could have
you're quite unique in that respect.
Yeah, how many times have I, but how many times have, maybe a white person done something without those same consequences,
Right.
and made a mistake. And I feel like I'm not articulating this so much because it's complicated for me, this idea that sometimes Black women aren't allowed to make mistakes, and to walk away alive. And the fact that she was murdered for asking for help, but often in the same way with Trayvon Martin, I imagine what it is to be so alone while you are dying, without someone there that you love to hold your hand. I think that always haunts me when I think about particular instances where Black people are murdered. This idea of the last person they see is the person that hurt them. And that they don't have they don't have that sense of comfort or support in their final moments. And that, I think, really resonated with me with Renisha Mcbride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, it seems like it seems like real thought went behind that choice when you had, there were a lot of references you could have used, and that just seems very powerful choice of like your choice of words. That Elizabeth Bishop wrote that she really admired these 17th century prose writers because their writing showed their mind in action. And I think this is, and I admire poems that don't just repeat the same thing and that don't end up where they began, but that really show a mind processing the world. And it's one of the things that I so love about this poem, that it just from the very title, it just pulls me into your mind, and the way you think about the world and the way you think about yourself. And it's just totally compelling and so moving and vulnerable. And but it's vulnerable at the same time that I'm also convinced that you really know exactly what you're doing. And I want poets to convey that part of themselves too, not just kind of feeling your way in the dark. And
the poem advertises its own making, doesn't it? In that line, I'd make nothing. Clearly, the mother is telling her she's going to be a financial ruin if she goes for poetry or teaching. Right. But of course, the making is also the making of the poem, and the poem feels like a made thing. And I was thinking that it feels made in a way which can be evoked by a line from Eliot. Eliot in The Wasteland says, "On Margate sands I can connect nothing to nothing," and we half feel inclined to think that he's saying I can't connect anything to anything, I can't make connections, but of course he is in another sense connecting one kind of nothing which is something to another kind of nothing which is something. And this poem is a pondered and constructed entity insofar as it postulates a series of connections between one species of nothingness and another.
Yeah.
You were making, Lloyd, about Elizabeth Bishop's saying while she was in college that what she wants to have in her poetry is not thoughts, but the mind thinking. Is exactly what Krysten did in that last word. The difference between life and living, those two words, is the difference between thoughts and thinking.
And picking up on that, I want to thank Krysten for reading the poem, because what so struck me about the form you created and the openness of it, not locking us in, was that each time I read it, I felt and went someplace else. And the warmth and intensity and variation and meaning with which you read it and how you shared it with us, I think was an extraordinary gift today, and is something, Lloyd, thank you, Krysten, thank you, because to hear a poet read a poem with that kind of involvement and surprise and connection, and as you said, I think you said you read it differently every time, but we sense that, and it's terribly important because it's living.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a real, there's a kind of spontaneity in the poem itself that, I mean, we can analyze it and we could see the structure and we could see all the thought behind it, but that's all kind of slightly hidden by this sense of this spontaneity, this sense that it's just happening while we're reading it. And I think that's true about the way Krysten read it, that it is that sense of living through it that's just so impressive. Jane?
Are you talking to me? I've been shaking.
Yeah, I am. I see you nodding, and
I keep nodding.
I like it when people.
This was gorgeous to me. I loved this poem, and I read it from Poem Day, and I remember sending it to my sister. It's just like, wow.
Wow.
And to hear you read it was even more wow. I just loved it. Thank you. I have to get going, unfortunately, but I've been holding on because I loved it so much. So I'm going to read more of your work. I just love it. Thank you. So.
And thank y'all so
Thanks, Jane.
and Jane, thank you. And thank y'all so much for listening to all of this, because you never know when you read a poem how it will be received.
Yes.
I appreciate y'all so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much. Hi, Kurt. nice to see you.
I've been quiet, and sorry for that, but it's very good to see you and to see you all. And of course, I get to hear Krysten read all the time, but it's always
Good. Selena, I have to ask you if I've been hearing terrible things about Metropolis.
It
Are
is. It is
you
terrible.
okay?
Yeah, we are okay, but it's really a human tragedy. You know, lots of people deaths and lots of people there are not in a very good position. But I would like to make a comment to Krysten.
Please.
I wasn't really, because I feel a little bit shy with so many remarkable comments that I hear, and I learn so much. But Krysten, I read this poem this morning, and a friend called me when I was just starting, and then I read it out loud to my friend. And in the end, there was this silence between us, because it touched us. I think Lloyd expressed it beautifully. In a place inside of us that it's just like talking about our lives, about our experiences. And probably maybe because I'm at that moment very also vulnerable, you know, seeing so many vulnerable people. I was crying by the end, because I felt just like you were talking to me, and I'm not American. I don't have an American background whatsoever. And another dimension is that you use, for a foreigner, so simple words. The wording is like, it's a common wording, but so powerfully assembled. I don't know if this is the right word, but that it's heartbreaking, really. Thank you very much for writing this. And thank you, Lloyd, for giving me this opportunity to read this and get to know Krysten, which is really a treat to know a poet and the person behind what it's like watching a film and talking to the filmmaker, and get this privilege it's really powerful. Thank you very much, Krysten, and thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you for coming today, and I hope you're okay. Any other thoughts? We probably should let Marita get back to work, and
one more.
Catherine, please. Sure.
It's just what you said, Krysten, about your students and how you incorporating a student into your poem, that you didn't, I think you used the word exploit their trauma. It reminded me of something and put in a new light on something that I read years ago, which was this is also on the subject of teaching and poetry, that the late Kenneth Koch had a series of essays in the New York Review of Books about teaching the writing of poetry in inner city schools. You're nodding, you know those. But that later he was collected in the book Wishes, Lies, and Dreams. And what you said brought to my mind his inviting his students, these are children, to use Spanish in their poetry, for the music of it, or write poems that are lies. With the Spanish, he was inviting them to bring into their poetry the richness of the homes they came from. You know, so I was reminded of that when you said you don't want to just be displaying their trauma.
Thank you for reminding me of that. I will definitely.
You reminded me of it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Few last words.
I just want to thank the Somerville Library for hosting us and that work to make this happen. And Lloyd, thank you also for this invitation. And thank y'all all for on a Saturday, we're here talking about a poem. I think that's really resonating with me in a specific way.
Yeah.
So I really,
you know, we're not Americans either.
Well, thank you.
I just to repeat everything that you guys have said and these last comments and Krysten and Lloyd for putting this together and Selena for your beautiful comments. Krysten, this poem is incredibly powerful and there's so many emotions going through it. I really appreciate you sharing it with us. I appreciate hearing your voice as you read it to us. And I just have an abundance of thanks for you and for Lloyd and for everyone to be here. Thank you.
Krysten, thank you so much. I know we were going to do the poem today, and I just can't imagine doing it without you being there and reading it. And thank you for that. Thank you for the poem, and thank you everyone for coming to visit today. And see you soon. I don't quite yet know the date or the next poem, but this was very special. And thanks so much. And again, thank you, Marita, for being such a welcoming host. Yeah, I loved everything that everyone had to say, and be well, everyone, and thanks.